Today we have the pleasure of speaking with one of the previous presidents of the Florida Association of School Psychologists, Dr. Gene Cash. Welcome, Gene.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Gene is the 40th FASP president. So could you tell us when your tenure actually occurred, when you served in your official capacity?
You're assuming two things. Number one, that I remember, but it was 1996 to 97, and that I had an official capacity rather than being incapacitated. Hopefully, I did serve in an official capacity.
I'm sure you did, Gene. And we are going to hear a lot more about that during this interview. But it is now July 12th, 2018, and we're in the middle of our Summer Institute at the PGA National Resort and Spa, Palm Beach Gardens. And we're several years past the time when you were FASP president.
Right.
And so could you just tell us about what you're doing now?
Well, now I'm full-time as a professor of school psychology and clinical psychology at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. I recently retired from my part-time private practice. I'd been in private practice for 23 years before I came to the university 15 years ago. And now it was a little too much. But in addition to my full-time job at the university, I also have been on the FASP executive board, and I'm still on the FASP executive board. This is I guess my 40th year on the FASP executive board. And I have some other things that I'm involved in. For example, I'm currently the immediate president of the American Academy of School Psychology, the board or the organization that recruits for the ABPP, the American Board of Professional Psychology credential, which I hold. And I am the current president of the Trainers of School Psychologists. And something I'm very proud of is that I'm the first non-medical doctor ever to have been appointed the chair of a committee for the World Allergy Organization. I chair the committee on the psychosocial aspects of allergy.
I'm overwhelmed, Gene, and
I was trying to overwhelm you.
Okay, and I have to say, as a current member of the FASP board, we are very grateful that you are still on the board after 40 years, and we hope you're here another 40 more.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful I'm still alive, but I hope I can continue to serve FASP for a long time.
Thank you, Gene. Let's return to your time when you were officially the FASP president. So tell us about some of the major events or accomplishments that took place under your leadership.
Well, it was an interesting time, and one of the very first things that I had to do as FASP president was to go before the Board of Psychology and to testify, because the Board of Psychology was considering adopting a resolution or adopting a rule that would prohibit licensed psychologists from sharing raw data, raw psychological test data, with school psychologists, certified school psychologists. And several of us were there to testify. I testified that that would be a very unwise idea, and testified about the credentials of certified school psychologists and the appropriateness of sharing psychological test data with them because of their training. And I would like to think that that had an impact on the Board of Psychology, but actually the real impact on the Board of Psychology was when Dr. Gogh from was it Gogh, I think it was, from the Department of Education, testified that if licensed psychologists refused to provide test data in appropriate circumstances to certified school psychologists, that the licensed psychologists would probably never get another referral from public schools again. And so I think that probably had more impact than what I said.
Wow, well, that was a good ploy.
That was. Some other things that happened during my presidency were issues about getting school psychologists who had graduated from doctoral level school psychology programs the right to be licensed in Florida as psychologists. The Board of Psychology seemed to think that wasn't appropriate. However, we were able to convince them otherwise. And the thing of which I'm most proud that happened during my presidency was that we initiated the FASP Children's Services Fund Incorporated, the charity arm of FASP. We had our first fundraiser for the Children's Services Fund the year that I was president, and that still is ongoing. We've provided more than $150,000 worth of grants to needy children and families in the state, and just tons of school supplies and food and stuffed animals to schools and school kids across the state. Very proud of that, initiating the charity.
Well, would you like to tell us how other school psychologists could contribute to the charity if they'd like to?
I would love to. You just have to go on the FASP website, and as a part of the FASP website, there's a CSFI, or Children's Services Fund Incorporated section, and in that section there's a form which you can use to request a grant, for one thing, but also to make a donation. In addition, there should be, this year we had a glitch, but there should be a form, or part of the form, when you renew your FAST membership, which enables you to make a separate donation to the Children's Services Fund and become a member.
Excellent, thanks.
Or you can just send me a check. What the heck?
Right, okay.
I'm the current treasurer.
Okay, excellent, good news. All right, well then, tell me some of the challenges that occurred during the time when you served as FAST president. Were there any?
Well, yeah, I told you a couple of the challenges already about dealing with the Board of Psychology. The Board of Psychology hasn't always been friendly to school psychologists and to school psychology in general. So those were important issues. Other challenges had to do with the shortage of school psychologists. There has been, for a long time, a shortage of school psychologists and a critical shortage in the state of Florida. And so we have constantly fought for the right of school psychologists to be paid a bonus or an extra stipend if they have the NCSP, to improve the salaries of school psychologists, and to provide stipends for future school psychologists who are in graduate training in school psychology. So all of those things were and have been issues, but they were very prevalent issues when I was president of FASP.
What it seems to me is then the issues that you had ended up turning into your accomplishments, because you actually faced them head on and then made them successes.
I appreciate your saying that. As I mentioned before, I can't take credit for that. I can take credit for helping, I suppose. I can't take credit for all of those things coming to pass, but it was really important and really valuable to be a part of it, and to have the help of so many accomplished school psychologists across the state. Another thing that was an issue when I was president was the licensure of school psychologists. The licensure of school psychologists came about, that is, having a part of Section 490 or Chapter 490 of Florida statutes came about in 1980, and I was involved in that. But in the mid-90s, a Federal Circuit Court ruled that the use of a Title Act, and ours at that time was a Title Act, for any profession constituted restraint of trade. And so we had to scramble to get a definition in Chapter 490 of the practice of school psychology. And so one of the things that I'm very proud of is that I helped to write that definition and helped to get that encoded into Florida statute. And it's a pretty broad and comprehensive definition of the scope of practice of school psychology. And therefore, in my opinion, Florida has the very best licensure act for non-doctoral school psychologists in the country.
Excellent. That's good to know. Could you tell me if there were any specific political, environmental, or personal influences that you feel may have impacted your presidency? Any that you'd feel comfortable sharing?
Well, any personal or political influences. I'm sure that there were personal and political influences. I can't remember for sure what they were. Clearly, the things that I've already mentioned
right.
were political issues that were personal to me too.
Mm-hmm.
Personal to me not so much because of their implications for me personally. That is, I have a doctorate in school psychology. I'm licensed as a psychologist at the doctoral level. Mm-hmm. And therefore, many of the things that I just mentioned to you mm-hmm. don't affect me at a personal level, but they affect school psychology as a specialty area within the broader profession of psychology. And by the way, that's the way I like to frame it. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I have been passionate in believing that that specialist level school psychologists should be afforded all the rights and responsibilities, licensure-wise, certification-wise, and so forth, that are afforded to other mental health professionals. And by the way, I'm passionate about the notion that school psychologists are mental health professionals. In fact, I believe that school psychologists are the best trained mental health professionals in the schools, and that they provide extremely valuable services in the private sector when they're licensed to provide those.
Well, we definitely appreciate all the work that you've done advocating for psychologists, school psychologists in particular. Could you tell us what being a FASP president has meant to you personally?
I'm glad you asked that. And the reason I'm glad is because, number one, I would love to be able to inspire other school psychologists to want to be FASP president. But that having been said, what I'm getting ready to tell you is just the truth from my perspective. I have had a long and interesting and varied professional career. Over the course of that professional career, I've had the good fortune to have many, many growth experiences at a professional level. And I can honestly say that even though I've been president of NASP and president of many other organizations, some of which I mentioned earlier, the 3 years during which I was president-elect, president, and immediate past president of FASP were the most important growth years in my career.
Wow. Well, that's very good to hear, and thank you for sharing that. You are actually one of those unique and rare school psychologists who received the Willard Nelson Lifetime Achievement Award. And this indicates that you have made a significant impact on school psychology practice across the state and nation. And as you've been speaking, I think that any listeners can understand why. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the some of the accomplishments that led to your selection for this award?
Well, I think one of the major accomplishments of anyone who receives an award like that is getting old. So I'm very pleased that I have gotten old and that I have been in good health and that I've been able to contribute hopefully significantly to the field of school psychology. Obviously, some people thought so. And so I'd like to think that my many years of service to the executive board, that my having been president of the state association, having been president of the National Association, having helped to get licensure for non-doctoral school psychologists in Florida, having helped to write the scope of practice for non-doctoral school psychologists in Florida, having done a fair amount of research now that I've been at the university on school psychology and school psychological issues, have made an impact in some way. One of the things that I'm very proud of are the articles that I wrote for the NASP communique, particularly the articles that I wrote when I was president. One of them was titled Rembrandt, Van Gogh, and School Psychology. And the gist of that article was that school psychology, in order to be, for a school psychologist to be a really comprehensively trained and fully competent school psychologist, we have to blend the technical expertise that's necessary for school psychology and the science of school psychology, like Rembrandt, who was the ultimate technician, with the passion and the art of somebody like Van Gogh. That makes us really competent school psychologists, that blend of the scientific, the technical, and the artistic. I'd like to think that to some degree I've certainly tried to model that blend in my practice throughout the years.
Well, from an observer, it seems like there's no way that anyone would say that you have not accomplished that 100-fold.
Thank you.
But also, that article would be worth revisiting. We need to get a hold of that.
Be happy to provide it to you. Just happen to have it handy.
Okay, great. Is there anything else or any final words of wisdom that you'd like to impart to us as a former FASP president?
Words of wisdom. You're assuming that I'm wise now. I appreciate that deeply. Yeah, I think first let me say that I have been honored to discover or to hear that at this APA convention I'll be awarded the Jack Barden Award, Achievement Award from Division 16. So I'm humbled by that and grateful for it. So that's something that I'd like to add. But in terms of words of wisdom, I'd like to say that school psychology is one of the most important fields that a person can enter. I believe that school psychologists should be advocates. Advocates not only for individual children and their families and for teachers and other school personnel, but school psychologists should also be public policy advocates. One of the things that I've done for a number of years on behalf of FASP and now also of the school psychology programs in the state of Florida is to take a number of students to Tallahassee, the state capital, to learn about public policy advocacy, to meet legislators, to attend committee hearings and sessions of the Senate or House if they happen to be in session, so that these young, budding school psychology students will eventually become passionate public policy advocates. I'm a fond believer in one of Phil Lazarus's quotes, which is that when it comes to public policy, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. It's really important for us to be at the table.
Well, I hope all of us keep that in mind. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Gene Cash, the 40th president of the Florida Association of School Psychologists.
Well, thank you, Denise, for arranging this.